My name is Maris Bennett, and I am 31. There are certain sounds that announce themselves before you understand why you're listening. The soft click of a stovetop turning off, the way the apartment's old elevator sighs as if it were exhaling a secret. Our apartment smelled like lemon that night, zest left in a dish, a candle guttering like it had somewhere to go. Julian had been on time for everything when we were new. Dates, texts, small promises that knit a life together. 7, he'd said. Duck and lemon tart. I want to see the face you make. He'd sent the link, circled the dessert. He had an easy way of making the future feel like a plan. At 6:03 p.m., my phone made a sound I did not want to hear. Not the cheery ping of an expected message, but the small, exhausted groan of something that has been used too often and is finally tired of pretending. Julian. I'm at Jasmine's. She isn't well. Don't overthink. Don't be jealous. She just needs me. There are sentences that arrive already wearing their clauses of defense. Don't be jealous. Don't overthink. You can smell the smoke before you see the flame. I set the phone down like it might burn me. The apartment continued to play its part. The saucepan simmered. The lemon tart batter sat like a promise. A candle flickered as if it were trying to keep its composure. I looked at the dress I'd chosen. Black silk, an edge of possibility, and felt as if I were looking at a future that had already been cut for time. Jasmine's name had been in the periphery for months. She was a woman who belonged to Julian's past, the kind of ex that slides back into someone's life with the practiced ease of a returned book. But names wobble when they're said enough. At first, Julian's stories about Jasmine were plausible, too plausible, which is the cleverest kind of lie. She needed support through a rough patch, he said. She was fragile in ways only he could understand. Friends are friends, he told me. I tried to be decent. I tried to be the kind of woman who was generous in small things. Generosity looks cheap when it's used as cover. It wasn't one thing that woke me up. It was a pattern of small, deliberate deviations. A phone slotted carefully, face down at dinner. Calls moved to another room. Gifts arrived with receipts claiming deep discounts. An expensive pair of shoes explained as a client thing. And then the laptop failed, right before a supposed pivotal project. Convenience seems to love timing. It's fine, Julian said. Just for a week. Can you set me up on the home office? Your desktop is clean. I'll use a fresh profile. I am a programmer by trade, enough to know what fresh profile means, and to feel the teeth of possibility against a jaw. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe I was. But there is a place between being ridiculous and being willfully blind. I chose the other side. Before creating the profile, I let myself be careful in ways the word careful rarely appears in romance stories. I installed a simple, discreet remote viewer and a keylogger, tools that give you the slow, methodical mirror of someone else's evenings. It felt like a betrayal. It felt like an act of war. Mostly, it felt unavoidable. I wanted proof. I wanted the cold certainty of data, because feelings blur at the margins. You don't have to wait long once you give yourself permission to look. The first night he used the desktop, I watched from my laptop in the bedroom light. It was absurd and intimate all at once, his fingertips in a different way than he touched me, the little pauses between messages, as if he were a composer deciding when to drop a note. He logged into an account that did not have his name. He clicked into threads that were not mine to read. Names lit up the screen. Jasmine, whispered in messages that were beyond flirtation. They were plans, dates, hotels, jokes about timing, lines about the best moment to tell her. There, in a quiet file, were references to another name I did not expect, Juliana Croft. Juliana Croft, the private, almost mythic person I had seen in a magazine once, a woman whose name carried feature articles and photos of yachts. Juliana, not Julian, which surprised me until I remembered how easily the world rearranges around whoever wears the money. A quick search revealed her. A woman with a neat line of philanthropic headlines, a husband whose name popped up in society columns, and tastes that tasted expensive even in print. The messages to Juliana were different from the ones to Jasmine. They were flatter, more polished, an artful blend of flattery and proposition. Different games, different stakes. The first night I saw it, fury made me small and sharp. They weren't even trying to hide everything well. Jasmine typing with that little flourish Julian once told me he loved, Juliana's name like a shiny pin on a map. They were not just flirting, they were architecting their exit. I could have confronted Julian then. I could have thrown the laptop, screamed, called friends, lit that candle, and let it burn all the way down. Instead, a curious thing happened. Where pain made me want to explode, something more settled took its place. A cold, careful focus like a lens being steadied. If they were building a house of lies, I decided, I would not run into it with a sledgehammer. I would redraw the blueprints. I spent the next days watching. Not out of malice, though there was some of that, but because the world as it existed for me required proof to be dismantled. I traced hotel bookings, receipt chains, the shadow of a flight that was not to the conference Julian mentioned, but to a private airstrip near Juliana's coastal estate. There was, tucked into metadata and a booking confirmation, a single appointment that read differently. A harbor town reservation, a particular restaurant Juliana liked, a custom watch that showed up in a glossy photograph of Juliana at lunch. It became a plan and then practice. I moved money quietly, opened an account in a bank with manners, consulted a lawyer's terse note about tenant rights and deeds. I started packing boxes at night, small, clinical boxes of things that belonged more to memory than to ownership. Not out of pettiness, out of necessity. When something hurts you, you learn to make choices that preserve the parts of you that remain undamaged. I told myself I would not make a scene. I would not be the drama of someone else's story. I would, instead, let them spin their narrative until the frame itself broke. That decision, in the small geometry of a Thursday night and a slow burner of a lemon tart, felt like a promise to myself. It was not about vengeance as much as it was about certainty. I wanted them to feel the consequence, yes, but not because I delighted in it, because I wanted, finally, to be the one to close the door. I closed my laptop and looked at the black dress on the hanger. The candle flamed like a tiny sun and then bowed out. Outside, the city kept its indifferent hum. Inside, I let my grief collect and harden into something with teeth, a plan to reveal, a photograph waiting to be taken, and a patience I had not known I owned. The weekend passed like a clock that refused to tick. Everything in the apartment held the same shape, but none of it belonged to me anymore. His toothbrush leaned against mine like a prop. His jacket hung on the hook by the door, waiting for a shoulder that had already left the story. Julian was good at pretending, almost perfect. He still kissed my forehead before leaving for client meetings. He still texted mid-afternoon, "You eaten?" Like muscle memory that hadn't caught up with deceit. But something about the timing of his affection had changed. Love came in rehearsed bursts, always just enough to make me question my own suspicion. And that's the cruelest kind of lie, one that's half believable. I learned that Julian's lies bloomed in patterns, like wildflowers pushing through cracks in concrete, beautiful until you realized they were choking everything underneath. The remote monitor became my confession booth. Each night, I'd sit cross-legged on the bed, laptop open, listening to the whir of my own machine as if it were whispering the truth I couldn't say out loud. The first thing I noticed was the timing of their messages. Every night at 10:37 p.m., a thread between him and Jasmine would spark to life. Sometimes it was something banal. You'd look perfect in that dress. He won't suspect a thing. Other nights, it was planning. Dinner Friday? Private room at Linnea. We'll tell her then. It'll be kinder face to face. Kinder. The word pressed against my throat like a laugh I couldn't swallow. But then came the other thread, the one that glowed colder, sleeker. Juliana Croft. Her messages were almost clinical. They didn't flirt. They transacted. If you're serious about the proposal, you'll need to free yourself first. My husband is hosting a retreat next weekend. You'll blend in fine. I clicked on one attachment, a hotel booking confirmation. The payer name was Croft Holdings Limited. The date matched the business trip Julian had claimed for next week. It was almost art, the efficiency of his betrayal. One woman for ambition, one for image, and one, me, for convenience. I didn't sleep much that week. When I did, my dreams were crowded with rooms full of people who all knew something I didn't. So I started preparing, not to confront, but to survive. First, I moved my savings into a separate account. Then I visited a lawyer I'd found online under quiet counsel. She was short, sharp-eyed, and didn't ask for details. I told her I was preparing for a domestic separation. She handed me a form for eviction rights and said, "Document everything. Emotions come second. Paper comes first." That became my mantra. 3 days later, I got my proof. Julian told me he'd be out of town for a technology summit in Denver. The keylogger disagreed. It showed flight confirmations, yes, but not to Denver. A one-way ticket to a private airstrip near Cape Haven, the coastal estate listed under Croft Holdings. My chest went cold. I zoomed in on the reservation details. A 5-star boutique hotel in the harbor town, 2 guests, one of them listed as J. Park. The other line, hidden in metadata, read simply, Croft J. Juliana. The irony hit hard. Same initials, different worlds. I opened a tab and searched Juliana Croft yacht. The top image was of her stepping off a sailboat in linen, laughing beside her husband, a man in his late 50s, gold watch catching sunlight. The caption called it a portrait of power. He wore a watch so distinctive it was practically a signature. White gold face, blue dial, custom engraving visible even in photos. I made a mental note. If I ever saw that watch again, I'd have my evidence. So I drove. I told Julian I had a deadline that weekend, something that required solitude. He smiled like a man who believed me easily, because he wanted to. At dawn, I packed a bag, drove 4 hours south, and parked near the Harbor Cafe, opposite the restaurant where the reservation was made. I ordered coffee I never drank. The town was quiet, rich in that coastal way, clean stone, slow footsteps, laughter that belonged to people who thought consequences were for other kinds of humans. Hours passed. My fingers itched, my nerves hummed like live wires, and then I saw them. Julian and Juliana. They emerged from the restaurant, sunlight scattering off glass windows and the glint of his betrayal. Juliana's hand rested on his arm like ownership, not affection. Julian looked up at her with that same half-smile he once reserved for me. I lifted my phone. The zoom caught them perfectly. Juliana's face framed by sea breeze, Julian mid-laugh, and there, shining like proof, the blue-dialed watch on her husband's wrist as he walked out the door behind them. 3 people, 1 frame, 1 story. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just took the picture, saved it twice, and watched them disappear down the cobblestone street. The drive home was soundless. The highway stretched like a vein under open sky, and I realized how small everything becomes once you stop feeding it hope. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and looked at the photo again. It was perfect. Evidence, symmetry, justice waiting in pixels. I moved the last of my savings out of our shared account, leaving just enough to keep up appearances. I scheduled movers for the following Thursday. Then I called the lawyer again and said, "Let's make it official." She asked, "Are you safe?" I thought about it. "I'm getting there," I said. By the time Julian returned, my smile had become a kind of armor. He brought gifts, perfume, flowers, stories about conferences and panels. I thanked him softly, almost tenderly. When he kissed my cheek, I caught the faintest trace of ocean salt. He didn't notice the emptiness in the drawers. He didn't notice the quiet in my eyes. He thought he was winning. He thought I was still playing the same game. He was wrong. A week later, my phone buzzed again. "Jasmine. Dinner Friday? Big news. Bring Julian." I almost laughed. Of course. They were going to announce it. To me. Their engagement, their grand reveal, the new life they'd built out of the rubble of mine. They'd invited me to be the witness to my own replacement. Perfect. I stared at my reflection in the black screen of my phone and whispered, "You have no idea what you're walking into." Because I already had the photo, the bank transfers, the eviction notice waiting in draft form, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel small, I felt ready. The night they chose to humiliate me was a Friday, polished and deliberate. The kind of evening that pretends to be ordinary until you step into it and realize it's been staged for your undoing. The restaurant sat on the 12th floor of a boutique hotel, all glass and candlelight. The city shimmered below us like a witness. I arrived first because I wanted to see the stage before the actors took their marks. Our friends were already gathering, the same small circle Julian and I had built together. Some of them smiled at me with that tight politeness people wear when they know more than they're saying. Others avoided my eyes entirely. It didn't matter. I had learned that silence has weight, and mine was heavier than all of theirs combined. When Julian walked in, hand at the small of Jasmine's back, the room seemed to tilt slightly. She was radiant in a gold dress that caught the light like it had been waiting for applause. His suit was tailored, his expression unbothered. I could tell he thought this would be the night I broke. Tears, shock, maybe a whispered why. Instead, I smiled. He kissed my cheek like we were still in some vague, undefined friendship. Jasmine gave me the kind of hug that smelled like triumph, expensive perfume and victory disguised as concern. "Maris," she said sweetly, "I'm so glad you could come." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, and meant it. Dinner began with small talk. The waiter poured champagne I didn't drink. Forks clinked, laughter rose in waves, and I listened to them all performing normalcy. Julian leaned toward Jasmine more than once, brushing her wrist with the back of his hand. Every touch was a breadcrumb. I caught our reflection in the window, them shining in the middle, me at the edge, the ghost of a woman they thought they'd already erased. Halfway through the meal, Julian reached for his glass and said, "It feels good, doesn't it? Everyone together again." I looked him straight in the eye. Together is one word for it. He blinked, a flicker of confusion, maybe even guilt. But guilt, I've learned, can be smoothed over like linen if you press it hard enough. By dessert, the mood changed. Jasmine tapped her spoon gently against her glass. The sound sliced through the chatter like a blade. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice trembling with rehearsed sincerity. "I just wanted to say thank you for being here tonight. This past year has been transformative." Julian smiled beside her, his hand now fully entwined with hers on the table. "Sometimes," Jasmine continued, "you realize the life you have isn't the life you're destined for. And I am so, so happy to say that I've found the person I'm destined to be with." Every eye turned to her, then to him. She took a breath that shimmered with performance. "Julian and I have been seeing each other for a few months now, and tonight—" She held up her hand, the diamond catching the candlelight. "We're engaged." Applause, laughter, a few gasps that weren't entirely genuine. Every friend looked to me next. The designated tragedy. Waiting for the breakdown. Waiting for the spectacle. I gave them nothing. Instead, I leaned back, pulled my phone from my clutch under the table, and tapped twice. One photo, one airdrop, one target. Julian's phone chimed almost immediately. He frowned, glanced down, thumbed the screen open, and then silence. His eyes froze, then widened. He turned white in a heartbeat. The air left the table. The applause died mid-laugh. Jasmine looked at him, confused. "What is it, baby?" He didn't answer. He just turned the screen toward her. The photo glowed on his phone. Julian himself, arm around Juliana Croft, the older woman's husband visible in the background. The signature blue-dialed watch gleaming in the sun. Jasmine's smile collapsed. What is this?" "When was that taken?" Julian hissed. She stammered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The photo," he barked. "Last Saturday. You said you were with your aunt. You used my card to book that hotel." Color drained from her face. Her eyes darted toward me, pleading and accusatory all at once. "Oh, Maris," she started. I tilted my head. "Congratulations, by the way." The table had gone still. You could hear the restaurant's music again, faint and polite, as if embarrassed to keep playing. Julian stood so abruptly that his chair shrieked across the floor. "We're done," he said to Jasmine, his voice shaking with fury. "You're unbelievable." He yanked the ring from his pocket and threw it on the table. Everyone stared. Forks frozen, champagne half raised. He looked at me then, just one look. There was shame there, real for once. "She knew," he muttered to no one in particular. "She knew this whole time." Then he left. No dramatic farewell, no parting words, just a slammed door and the hiss of the elevator outside the restaurant. Jasmine sat there, hollowed out. Her perfect announcement had turned into a public execution. I almost pitied her. Almost. I took a slow sip of champagne and stood. The bubbles fizzed like applause in my throat. "Well," I said quietly, "that was eventful." No one stopped me as I walked out. When I reached the street, the night air was sharp and bright, and the city lights looked different, like the world had quietly rearranged itself in my favor. By the time I got home, the movers had already done their part earlier that day. Every trace of Julian was gone. No clothes, no shoes, not even the framed photos he once insisted we keep. I checked the security camera feed. At 11:26 p.m., someone appeared at the door. Jasmine. Her makeup had melted under tears. She pounded on the door. "Maris, please, I need to talk to you." I watched through the camera's glow. I didn't answer. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "He left. I have nowhere to go. You don't understand. It was never about you." I pressed the intercom button. "You're right. It never was." She froze. "There's nothing left here for you, Jasmine. Your things are gone. The address and key to your storage unit were couriered to your parents this morning. Have a good night." Her face twisted. Disbelief, then rage. "You ruined me." "No," I said softly. "You did that yourself." I clicked off the intercom. The sound of her fists on the door faded, then vanished. I poured myself a drink, whiskey this time, and sat on the couch, the quiet settling around me like new skin. My phone buzzed once more, a notification. Message sent. It was the photo again, this time forwarded anonymously to Eleanor Croft, Juliana's wife. Subject line, "Your husband last Saturday. Thought you should know." I set the phone down, took a long sip, and whispered to the empty room. Controlled demolition complete. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Morning came like nothing had happened, sunlight too polite to notice what it was shining on. My apartment was spotless, quiet, and mine again. No trace of Julian's cologne on the towels, no toothbrush leaning against mine. Just clean air, coffee brewing, and the sound of peace pretending to be normal. I didn't look at my phone until noon. When I did, there were dozens of notifications, missed calls, messages, even a few from mutual friends trying to understand what happened. I ignored them all except one. A single new message sat in my inbox, short and formal. From Eleanor Croft. Subject, "Thank you for your time." Body, "Your information has been received. You won't be hearing from him again." That was it. No signature, no flourish, but I knew. The storm had landed exactly where I wanted it to. By Monday, the dominoes began to fall. Word spread first about Juliana Croft's marriage. Eleanor had filed for divorce and frozen the couple's accounts. The headlines came 2 days later. Nothing too direct, just whispers in financial columns. Croft Holdings under internal review. Leadership restructuring imminent. I didn't celebrate. I just bookmarked the article and kept scrolling. Julian texted once, a message so long it filled the preview window. I didn't open it. I deleted it. Then I blocked his number. The same for Jasmine. The same for every friend who'd ever chosen silence over decency. The quiet that followed was absolute. 3 days later, my lawyer called. "Good news," she said. "The formal eviction's processed. Legally, you're clear." "Anything else?" I asked. A pause, then a soft laugh. "You're not going to believe this. A notice from a different attorney came through. Jasmine's name on it. She's claiming emotional distress and common law partnership benefits. She's demanding half your shared assets." I laughed. "She's welcome to half of what's left in the account, about $300. Would you like me to respond? Yes, I said, politely and with receipts. 2 days later, the letter went out. It was a masterpiece of precision, the property deed in my name, the bank statements showing no co-ownership, the legal paragraph explaining our state didn't recognize common law marriage. The closing line was my favorite. Should your client pursue this frivolous claim, we will be forced to subpoena witnesses to her multiple acts of infidelity, including one Juliana Croft and one Julian Park. They never replied. By the end of the week, the gossip reached its peak. Julian's career was slipping. The company he'd once bragged about working for suddenly restructuring, his name quietly removed from the website. Jasmine, meanwhile, had moved back in with her parents. Someone told me she was working a temporary job at a call center, complaining about how unfair life was. It wasn't revenge that made me smile. It was the balance. The way everything eventually corrects itself when you stop begging it to. A month later, I received one last call, an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened, a man's voice spoke, calm, regretful, strained. Maris, it's Julian. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I thought you should know. I lost everything. The job, the apartment, the money. Croft's lawyers cut me off completely. Jasmine's gone. Everyone's gone. You were right. You were always right. I hope you're okay. There was a pause, the sound of his breath catching. Then, I really did love you once. The message ended there. I didn't save it. I didn't delete it either. I just let it sit. Proof that the universe sometimes writes its own endings. 2 months later, I saw Eleanor Croft in a news photo, smiling at a charity gala, radiant and composed. Her company had absorbed 2 of Juliana's subsidiaries. The caption read, Eleanor Croft, CEO of Croft Holdings, leads record expansion following restructuring. The world was tidy again. Not perfect, but fair enough. At home, my life had shrunk beautifully. Mornings meant real coffee, a window cracked open, and the hum of quiet work. I'd started freelancing full-time, writing code and taking long walks between projects. Sometimes I caught myself glancing at the empty side of the bed and thinking not of what was missing, but of all the space left for air. There were still nights when I replayed it all, the candlelight, the dinner, the photo. But the ache had changed texture. It wasn't sharp anymore, just a dull scar I could touch without flinching. One evening, I stood at the same kitchen counter where it had all begun. The lemon candle burned low again. I poured wine, opened my laptop, and smiled at the screen's reflection, my own face, calm, unhurried. They'd tried to write me out of my own story. They thought they were the authors. They were wrong. I rewrote the code. I rewrote everything. The city outside was quiet, the light soft against the window. For the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like peace.